Good morning.
Morning.
It's good to have you here this morning. You know, it seems like it's been a long time since we've been in here. I got permission on this too, by the way. And we also are not going to be here next Sunday. So this morning we have a combined next Sunday. So maybe have a little bit of difficulty kind of getting off the ground and going, but we'll eventually get there. So I changed my lesson for this morning because I feel like that you're anxious to get into the topic rather than just a lot of preparation. So the lesson I had prepared for last Sunday, I'm going to have it later on, but I want to go ahead and get into what you're aiming for, is how we got the Bible. But, just a couple of slides I want to just kind of review, and maybe a few more slides on critical thinking before we go in, is we want to love the Word and we want to know the Word. And we saw scriptures of that last Sunday, and here are half of them. And then we talked about thinking differently and critical thinking. And that's just, I mean, it's so important. And then we shouldn't read or listen or whatever, the scripture, just to confirm what we already know. And we should instead go into it with an open mind. And Andrew's message this morning was spot on to just exactly what we're talking about. We're so accustomed to this, we just kind of, oh yeah, we studied that before. So, okay, let's dig down and look deep into it. And then we should though, read and study with those who have a different point of view to broaden our understanding and get a better understanding of people and how people think and who people are. So we should do that. And then we look at a little film on paying attention to details, and we often are oblivious to things that are around us. And again, reference to Andrew's lesson this morning. I heard this on a commencement address in 2005. I heard it online. And he tells a story. He says that he begins with, there are two young fish swimming along when they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods to them and says, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" Two young fish swim for a bit, and one eventually looks to the other and says, "What in the world is water? What do you talk about, water?" So again, it's so familiar. It's so familiar to us that we don't even realize where we are. So again, that was kind of something, the things that was talked about this morning as well. The highest compliment to critical thinking is, to someone who disagrees with us, is what? You were right. Not really. Actually, it's not you were right. It's you made me think. Good arguments help us to recognize complexity when we once saw simplicity. And the ultimate purpose of debate is to produce consensus. It's to promote critical thinking. So, now we're going to change gears and we're going to the lesson for today. So, what is the Bible? Give a multiple choice. Is it God speaking to us? There may be more than one answer. A collection of books, instructions for daily living, or God showing me the way to heaven? And you need to prove that. Prove your answer. You can say there's nuggets for all of it, but we've talked about, really, the definition of Bible is a collection of books. So it's really not God speaking to us. It's God speaking to people at that time, and it has application to us. So it's really not that. Instructions for daily living, well, I mean, there are instructions in there. This is not a manual. And God showing me the way to heaven. Okay, there's we learn about heaven and about Jesus and all that. But the Bible is simply a collection of books. How do we get the Bible? Did God just hand it down to us from heaven? And the answer is no. So, I think I showed this last week, rule book or wisdom. I know we talked about it, and rule book is certainty. This is what it says, wisdom is embracing mystery. When defining mystery as, this is a slide that we're going to see later on, but I wanted to show it today because God defines mystery, God remains shrouded with mystery in Job and Ecclesiastes, for example. We're going to talk about those. But what's the definition of mystery? When we can't know everything there is to know about God, or I think I know all about God, or what I think I know all about God is not all. Andrew even said this morning, do I know everything? Am I still learning? Am I still gaining wisdom and growing and changing? And I'll even say this. I taught biblical heritage in the auditorium class in 2018. I didn't teach anything wrong. What I'm getting ready to say is, but I didn't teach something I'm teaching here today. Because I think some of the things I said was just too extreme and too wrong, and I should have said it a little better overnight. And if we aren't growing that way as we're living from day to day, then I think that we are not fully giving credit and understanding. So all these things, rule book is this way, and wisdom is this way, and there are several things up there, and we just need to know and understand that it's not a rule book, but it's a book of wisdom. Trust in God rather than needing to be certain. I serve a loving God, and we should strive to be certain, but we should refrain from a preoccupation of correct thinking, lest it leads us to anger, arrogance, and hatred to those who think differently.
You know, just a little, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I think it's a very good point to say it's not a rule book, but we tend to make it not a rule book for daily living, but in our particular sect, tend to use it as a rule book to determine exactly how you must worship. Exactly how church should or has to be done. Oftentimes proof texting it to justify what we do. Right. Those traditions that have evolved, that had purpose and reason to start with, but then continue on until you don't even really realize why they got started, such as Sunday night church. Okay, mm-hmm. Sunday night church gets started because of various things, opportunity, but then it gets continued, and if you're not there on Sunday night, we'll go back and find some way to say that you had violated the rule book, okay, because the elders said you should be there, and so therefore you should be there. If you're not having Sunday night church, and we know those guys down the road, there's something wrong. Right. And that's so. I think we don't tend to want to make it an everyday living rule book, but we, for better or for worse, we tend to nitpick it and try to justify. Hand clapping, for instance, okay? Right. We actually had some hand clapping a few weeks ago here, okay? I can guarantee you can go find plenty of arguments against hand clapping, okay?
I understand. And you had a good point in your
well, we have re-envisioned the way we do the Lord's Supper, and I don't think that is wrong. Right. Of course, that has been re-envisioned multiple times because guess what? Supper means eating food. Right. And the original institution and the practice was almost certainly during communal meals on Sunday. Or Saturday night if you were a Jew, because the first day of the week starts at sundown. That's right. That is right. So I want to, I played this like before. So this may not be the first time you've heard this, but if we're going to talk about how we get the Bible, I think this is a really good...
The Bible, a book of books. Nowadays, the Bible is frequently printed as one book. But for more than 1,000 years, most people encounter the Bible as a library of multiple volumes or multiple scrolls. In light of this history, it's not so surprising that not all Bibles today contain exactly the same set of books. But if the Bible isn't always the same, then what do we mean when we talk about the Bible? The Bible is a collection. Specifically, it's the full collection of books that Jewish and Christian communities around the world have historically accepted as being uniquely authoritative. The Jewish Bible today is known as the Tanakh. It contains the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, The Christian Bible contains the Old Testament and the New Testament. Each testament contains several smaller collections. The biggest difference between the Jewish Tanakh and the Christian Bible is the New Testament. Most Christian traditions today agree that the New Testament contains 27 books. By contrast, major Christian traditions disagree about how many books belong in the Old Testament. The Protestant Old Testament matches the Jewish Tanakh in content, but some books are organized differently. The Roman Catholic Old Testament matches the Protestant Bible in organization, but the Catholic Old Testament contains more books. Eastern Orthodox Christians have even more books in their Old Testaments. Why do different Christian traditions have the same New Testament, but disagree about the part of the Bible they share with Judaism? The answer is timing. Have you ever thought about how different books became part of the Bible? Each book went through at least 3 basic stages. First, it was composed. Second, it was circulated and used, first on a smaller scale and then more widely. In many cases, it was also collected together with related books. Lastly, all the books and smaller collections were confirmed as part of a closed canon. This happened when most communities who used these books officially agreed that no more books should be added to or subtracted from the overall collection. This process finalized the Bible of today. For the New Testament, this process took place between the 1st and 4th centuries. The Gospels and the Pauline epistles were used widely as collections from the 2nd century onward. Different communities used various other books for a few centuries longer. Official agreement was established in the late 300s. The divisions between today's major Christian traditions all occurred later. The overall process that produced the Jewish Tanakh was similar, but the timing was different. The Torah and prophets were well-established collections by the 2nd century BC. Different communities used various other books for a few centuries longer. During this period, Judaism was diverse. In the 1st century AD, Christianity was born as a variety of Judaism. After the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, some varieties of Judaism died out, and Christianity gradually became a separate movement. The widespread Jewish agreement about the law and the prophets before the birth of Christianity explains why the differences between Christian Bibles in the Old Testament today are limited to a small percentage of books. The differences that remain were inherited before the Tanakh became the single official version of the Jewish Bible. Long ago, many communities through many centuries produced the Bibles we have today. The formation of this book is a testament to Jewish and Christian belief that God works through human history.
So I think that is kind of in a nutshell of what we're talking about and what we're going to be talking about as we go forward. If we have time at the end of this class, I'm going to talk about the New Testament precisely and the books and the kind of the timing for that. We may not have time, but if we don't, we'll start that next time we come as we finish. So, did the Roman Catholic Church set the canon? So, this came from Online Nicene Council. I have the web address on top up there. It's no longer available. Thank goodness I copied it, so I've got it. But if you look at these people, equip.org, everybody doesn't agree in everything. Everybody doesn't have, we don't have to agree with everything everybody says to understand and learn from them, which is what I said earlier. We need to study from people of different thoughts. But these people, they say is a belief of original sin, and they have hints of some form of predestination and those type of things that we generally don't look at kindly. But he still said, the conversation intensified quickly. You can't trust the Bible. My Latter-day Saints friend said, because you really don't know what books belong in it. You see, a bunch of men got together and decided the canon of the Scripture at the Council of Nicaea, picking some books and rejecting others. Then he says, then I heard the Council of Nicaea presented as a point in history where something went wrong. Something where a group of unnamed, faceless men decided for me what I was supposed to believe. I quickly corrected him about Nicaea, saying nothing was decided or even said. about the canon of the Scripture at that council. And so a lot of people say, that's when, the Catholics, what they say, decided. That's not true at all. And we're going to see, as a matter of fact, I think it's the next slide it is. I don't know where I got this, and I searched and searched and searched because I like to give source, but I couldn't find it. I found several sources that you could hodgepodge together and pull this together, but I think I got it precisely as I've written it up here, somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So, first of all, what is canonicity? What's that mean, Warren?
Well, we use that in literature. Harold Bloom talked about the Western canon. In other words, what is the established, agreed upon set of great works everybody should?
Yeah, the canon is just the group of books that we have in our Bible today. It's called the canon. I never heard the word canon until I was at a school in college, and it wasn't even a Church of Christ school. And we studied Bible, and he started talking about canon. Wow, I never heard that word before. It's a real word, but the canonicity is what was decided to go into that canon, and here are the 6 points. It was written by an authorized prophet or apostle. Now, Hebrews is an exception, but at the time in my mind, at the time the Bible was collected and put together, it was well thought and well believed that Paul was the author of Hebrews. It's questioned today, man. I don't even think it's true.
Said. There were significant numbers of people who really didn't think Paul was, but you needed to justify it. That was the justification.
Right. And if we get far enough on, you're going to see where in the earlier ones, Hebrews was one of them was left out, or even that for sure question. But then it also needs to be associated with, or it was associated with a recognized prophet or apostle. For example, Mark, who was writing it from the vantage point of Peter, and Luke, who was writing from the vantage point of Paul. Truthfulness, it had to be true, and faithfulness to previously accepted canonical writings. In other words, you couldn't have this say one thing and this say something else, and which one's true. Now, understand, we're going to be seeing it later on. There are things in Scripture, you look at this Scripture and it says one thing, you look at this Scripture and it says something totally different. I shouldn't say totally different. It says something different. Specifically numbers. A lot of, and I'm going to show some examples in the later classes, but okay, so their numbers different. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the concept of what is trying to be taught has to be in line with other Scripture, and it is confirmed by Christ, the prophets or apostles, and we see that in Luke chapter 24. It was mentioned in that, the Tanakh, and this is the Tanakh on the wall that I've written, where it shows law, prophets, and writings, and the books and how they fall in. And there are 24 of them, and it's exactly the same number as 39. I know in math, 24 doesn't equal 39. But the way they're organized, it's the same books in the Tanakh. And the Tanakh is what the Jewish people, I think even today, use that in their Bible, and that's it. But it's the same Bible that we have. It's the same Old Testament that we have. And then the big thing is church usage and recognition. In other words, what happened is, and as they were coming to this Council of Nicaea, as time had progressed from AD 29 up until about this time, people started, these letters and these books and so forth were circulated, and everybody was kind of using this and kind of using this, and the people, the books were really chosen by the leaders of the church, and we believe that they had God's guidance in helping choose those. But that's how the books were used, and the usage and recognition was the big thing.
I think you can say with any type of canon, whether you're talking literature or whatever, there's a central core that just about everyone agrees to. And then there are books that most people agree to.
Right.
And so most of the time it's the core and the most that what we call the canon. But then there are books that are questionable in various and sundry ways. And some of those get included and some of those get excluded, depending on who stands in rule of the situation.
That's right. And if we get far enough, and if we don't, we'll see it next Sunday, I'm going to show pictures of that. In other words, a list of, so it'll be a little bit clearer. But here, Metzger identifies 3 criteria for acceptance. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. All right. For acceptance of particular writings as sacred, authoritative, worthy of being read in the services of worship, and they are orthodoxy, apostolicity, and consensus. Now, orthodoxy, ortho just means correct or right. Doxy means practice, so it's the right practice or the right teaching or the right doctrine. And so that's one of the big things in what was decided that went in. Apostolicity, we talked about that. It was the apostles' teaching or someone close to them. And that's what, if it came from them, it was believed to be good and could go in. And then the second thing, it was consensus, and we talked about that. That's what people were beginning to use at the time. So he concludes that the most basic sense, neither individuals nor councils created the canon, but this is kind of the 6 points that I would say. So I want to look at some definitions. Anytime you're going to study something, you really should look at definitions and understand what you're talking about. And so abbreviation MS is manuscript. So manuscript, what's a manuscript? What kind of writing?
Handwritten.
Handwritten. Manu is hand, script is writing, so it's handwritten. Now, MSS then is manuscripts, it's plural. There are 2 major types of manuscript. There's uncials and there are cursives. Cursives are also called minuscules, and uncials are also called, I think it's the macroscules, but I'm pretty sure it's macroscules. But uncials were what was used in older times up through 1st century or so, but then as you go later on, then you started having cursives. And they're less valuable because they're written at a later time. And so there's a lot of copying the time you got there. And so you might not tend to be so strongly thinking going in that direction, because if uncials doesn't agree with it, because they were earlier. So I need an adventurous volunteer to read it. Before you see it. Okay. You sure? All right. Try this.
According to our research in university, it doesn't matter in what order. The letters, I can't even.
Somebody pick up.
The only important thing is that the first and last letters be at the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, like the words.
That's what it is.
And this is the reason I cannot spell. Okay? But I have no trouble at all reading that.
Okay.
Perfectly.
So I need somebody else, a more adventurous. It's going to be harder to read this one than that one. Anybody? Dave, I'll try.
What the world?
Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised before and through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning his Son, who was descendant from David according to the flesh.
Wow, that's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. That's pretty good. So, that's the way the uncials were written.
Yeah,
All
it's a space preservation.
And in those days, and he's right, because the medium in which they wrote was scarce and it was costly, and so it was.
The next step is to do what the Jews did, and you write without vowels.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
all you have, with a few exceptions, there are some consonants that act kind of like vowels. But basically, Jewish script Hebrew script is written without any vowels.
Yeah.
And it's also tends to be run together like this.
Yeah. And you even notice it crosses from one to the other. Crosses from one side to the other. One of the words does. Yeah.
And we have a different relation to books than they did. This is before Gutenberg.
That's absolutely true. This was all everything was handwritten.
And so the cost of a book was astronomical.
Absolutely.
Today, you can buy something for 99 cents.
That's right. So if you look at this side by side, so can you read this? Sure. Well, David read that like that. And you know what? This is easier to read for us than this is.
Well, that gets really hard if you squeeze it all together up here, where you have.
That
all
is
your-
true. That is-
Because it doesn't follow the pattern.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. So, autograph, what's an autograph?
Something signed.
Something that's signed is
Your
right.
original author.
The
right?
original offer, something that's signed, something that someone wrote themselves, right?
Or maybe dictated. to
Or
someone
maybe
else.
dictated, that is true.
That's,
So it's original text. What's extant?
exact, it means it's, exact.
Extent.
It's a
Extant,
copy
it's
that
still pretty-
exists
yes.
today.
Yes.
A copy that exists today. What's a scribe? We know what a scribe is.
Person.
Scribe is the one who wrote it. right?
Okay.
So a variant? What's a variant?
Changing wording,
So you mean
different word choices.
I have this manuscript and this, they don't compare?
Extra words, lost words,
Yeah.
extra sentences, lost sentences,
Yeah.
change in verb.
So we have to understand that. We have to understand that all this stuff came to, there were variants in it. So the development of it wasn't just as, God handing it down to us. So we're going to see that and we're going to understand a lot of that as we go.
But your variants are mostly copy errors.
So mostly,
copy
that is very true.
imitations. And then it depends on how you were copying it. Were you looking at a copy and copying it? Or in some cases, you had someone reading it.
Yep.
You had a bunch of people out here there writing it. And so now we have this added problem of the person reading it, pronouncing it, and the
Yeah.
person's hearing it.
We're going
and
to see
writing
those
it
things
down.
too.
And
So
so
part of that, when they were doing that, you had somebody dictating it to you and you were writing. You had, I hear there was correctors on each side.
Correct.
And as soon as
There
they,
were
"Look,
various-
that's wrong, look, that's wrong. So,
But at different parts in time, the effort to have good, correct copies was various. The Jews were known, the Masoretes were known for being meticulous in their copying. The early Christians were not so meticulous in their
that is
copying.
very true.
They were making oftentimes copies for themselves. It just
also
wasn't
a
the
production-
it wasn't the preservation process that
Exactly.
the Hebrews had.
It was more a production process to
Correct.
get it out, as opposed to preservation process. And he's talking about Masoretic, we're going to be talking about probably not, well, I think that's next, as a matter of fact, Masoretic text. But we're not going to talk about it in detail today, but we will later on. So, I looked up on how to pronounce this, and not even in the dictionary. So I went back and looked to the original thing that I heard. So I think it's palimpsest.
I think that's right.
Palimpsest. So what's a palimpsest?
It's where they erased it and they wrote back on top of it.
So when they had the scripture first, and this is particularly on like leather or vellum or
Yeah,
something like
this
that.
has to be pretty much on leather.
So it was on there, and it was so expensive and all this kind of stuff, and they needed new stuff. And so what they did, and what they didn't just erase it. It was a very intense process to
Yeah, they scrubbed it down.
scrub it down, chemically scrub it down, and so then they wrote over it. So what's important is not the thing that they wrote over it. The important thing is, because you want to go back and see what was written earlier and earlier. So the important thing was looking behind what was written over and seeing what was written under. And there is, over time, Robert, this is probably in the last couple of centuries they finally were able to do stuff
Yes,
like
it's
that.
been most of the last couple of years.
Yeah, so over time, so it's very, and by the way, I should say this, it's been since 1611. Why is that key? No?
1611 King James.
That's King James. Printing press is like 1400.
I see.
But King James was written before a lot of understanding that we have since then because of palimpsests. So I just told you what it was, and there it is. So P it's reference to papyrus, and as it was registered, there's 144 today. Peshitta, some of the things I'm just going to kind of mention. I don't think we're going into detail. It just means simple or common, and it's standard Syriac translation about the 5th century. So what's a scroll?
It's written on a roll.
Yeah. You take this piece of paper and you write on it, and you wrote it up on a scroll. You wrote
Basically
it.
used individual pieces, they glued them together so they were continuous and rolled them up.
Yeah. That's what a scroll is. So it's a rolled up manuscript.
And the two main writing materials, papyrus and vellum.
Right.
And papyrus, it rots, okay? So
Yeah.
papyrus, preservation of papyrus is only very well, and it's not even that good, in very dry climates. So a lot of your papyrus fragments and your papyrus go back to Egypt and places like that.
That's in scrolls.
Unfortunately, most of the early New Testament writings were almost universally probably written on papyrus.
Yeah, yeah. So prior to mid-first century, medium for writings of scripture was a scroll. And a scroll is what was generally put into papyrus.
But even by the time of Paul, he's probably using some books. He talks about not bringing the scrolls, but actually.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there was already this move to probably not be writing necessarily on scrolls, but in collections where they would take pieces of paper, fold multiple pieces over and kind of make a book.
Yeah. So a codex is making a book, as he just said. Codices is a plural for a book, and it's by just what he said, folding pages together and stitching them in the spine. And according to Origin of the Bible, Bruce, Mark was the first scripture published in a book form. That's page 209 in that book. With canon, we mentioned that earlier. It's a list of writings believed to be inspired, or as Warren was saying, it doesn't have to be scripture we're talking about. Canon can be other things as well. But if you're talking about scripture, it's the things that we believe to be inspired. And it literally means standard or rule. That's what the word canon means. Standard or rule. This is the standard, this is the rule, this is the basis. Deuterocanonical means second canon. Apocrypha is synonymous with Deuterocanonical. Is that what I mean? And it was written at a time between the Testaments. What period of time is that? How many years?
400 probably.
About 400 years. Textual criticism, we're going to have a complete class on that, but it's a study concerned with identification of these textual variants that we were talking about earlier. If I have all these variants, then you have smart people put all these together and look at all of them and pick out which one is really is going to go in. So I'm going to come back to that later. Yeah, I know. So I want to get to this. This is what I want to get to. I'll come back and get those others later. So this is what Dr. McClure mentioned earlier, that some of them had, I needed two different sheets to show this, but we're going to be talking about, and these are on the wall over here, the Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and Ephraim Reciprocus are on the wall. If you look at these, they all have just about all of the books. The Codex Vaticanus, which we believe is the best,
The earliest, most likely we have.
earliest, most likely, and probably the best, did not have 1st and 2nd Timothy in it, and did not have Titus or Philemon in it, and didn't have part of Hebrews in it. That doesn't show that. But it had the
I
rest
think
of it.
some of that was because some of that may have been lost. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah.
But
But if you look at this, and it didn't have Revelation, but if you look at this, these had all these, and if you look back on the other of the scribe, these did too, these did too. This had most of them, and maybe this one. But look at this down in here. This is not what we have in Scripture today. 1st and 2nd Plymouth was found in Alexandrinus. Nobody else. Shepherd of Hermas and Epistle of Barnabas was in the Sinaiticus, but nothing else. Even before, I mean, this is beyond my study, so Dr. McClure, you may have more
well,
understanding of this.
the mandatory fragment is basically just a mention of books.
Okay,
So it's not
okay.
the actual writings,
Okay.
it's just the naming of
All
the
right,
books.
all
And
right.
so, yes, they do name the Book of Wisdom and the
Yeah.
Apocalypse.
So, but look at it. If you go here up, all of these have most of it.
Yep.
And when I say a consensus of things brought together, it's because a lot of it was because of the sources that they had back then and how they put them together.
The four most significant other writings that have some claim to fame are the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, First Clement, and the Didache. So those are the four writings that are pushing first century. Some of them are clearly first century, if not first century, early second century. They confirm basically to the rule of faith. And there are some sects that used and included some of those in their New Testament and still do today. Not the major groups,
Right.
the Coptics and some things like that use some of those.
So a couple more slides that I want, there's a couple more slides we'll kind of get where I thought I wanted to make sure I got this far today. Irenaeus in 202 cites 21 books. All of them except Philemon, Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, 3 John, and Jude. Origin of Alexandria by the 3rd century used all 27 books, but there was some dispute over the canonicity of 4 of those original books, of the books that Origin was talking,
Yes.
Irenaeus was talking about. So 4 of those and Revelation. So now Revelation comes into question also by the early 3rd century. So when did we officially conclude that 27 books is the New Testament? By the late 4th century, about 367, by Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. And so if you look back at this is we didn't talk about him, we talked about all the rest of them. This is that time, and you'll see that all the books down through Revelation, and that's the time that the canon was put together like we have it today. Now I know this is and I wanted to do this because I felt like people were starving for this. So we're going to go back and look at a lot more detail as we go forward, but for just the big picture, this is the putting it together.
But within that 27, there's still some dispute. And, I mean, no, that has been the 27 we've had since then.
That's correct.
Some of those are more questionable than others. Most of those are without question early, but 2 Peter is problematic in multiple ways. Revelation is still, not that it's so problematic, it's just that it's so out of place in a lot of ways that it just was not a really super well accepted writing by some people, but the majority it was.
Okay. Starting next week, the week after next, we'll come back and go into it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Wait a minute.